Hey everyone. Here, I'll turn my camera on here. Welcome to our webinar, and thank you so much for joining. First of all, everyone can hear me okay? Maybe just type yes in the chat box if you can hear me real quick. Perfect. Thank you. Great. So the first order of business is actually the chat box, which some of you have used to let me know that you can hear me, which is awesome. We do ask that if you do have any questions throughout this webinar, that you keep yourself muted because there are a lot of us online, and that you actually just type them into the chat box. And our moderators will try their very best to get to every question, or for the vast majority of them at least. The second thing I'd just like to say is, obviously, I'm sure most of you are aware that this is a pre-event to our upcoming hackathon happening in Calgary at the in a couple of weekends from now. So we'll get a little bit into that near the end, but just keep that in mind, and we hope to see you there. My name's Claire. My name is Claire Bourgeois. I'm the Community Advocate for Innovation at ATB Financial. And I'm basically going to hop off right after doing this quick intro and pass it off to our great panel. What we're going to do is we're going to have a panel discussion from our friends at Axiome for the next 40 to 45 minutes about open finance around the world. And then we're going to bring it back to ATB and talk about the Alberta perspective. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to our friends at Axiome who have a deck here. And if anyone has any issues with the webinar, please just put it in the chat or send me an email. I'll be monitoring my email. Thank you.
All right, so let me start this. Thank you for having Axiome here at the ATB Hackathon, and to a topic that keeps us very busy in our minds, and where we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years watching it and comparing it. When we talk about open finance, we at the same time also look at regulations of PSD2 in Europe, as well as FDX in the US. And so it's a great privilege to be here today with us with my colleagues. Maybe quick introductions. My name is Dominik Weissert. I'm a partner. I'm heading up Axiom's business in North America. I've been working in the banking space over the last 20 years, implementing I want to say core banking solutions and exposure and data solutions around the world. Joining me are my colleagues Nicolas Grilli. He's our global product manager. He is located in the United Kingdom, where lots of open banking took off a couple of years ago already. And I think it'll be an interesting perspective he can deliver on what's happening in the markets there, how open banking after a couple of years changed, or what open banking changed, if at all, anything in the markets. Then we have Roman Ernst. He is our managing director in Austria. He's also heading up our product development on our digital stack. He will give a overall also a presentation and an insight what he's seen in his past working in banks and in his career, and impacts on the business models that we believe open banking will have. And we have Shirley Moncourt. She's our head of data in the US and Canada and North America. She will put, because we're talking lots about data at ATB in this context, she will get deeper into the subject of what we expect that open banking will do to data and the impacts on analytics. So not to hold everybody right up, but kind of this is also the agenda that we're going to follow. First, talk about the trends and what's happening from Nico, then data and analytics with Shirley, then a bit on the business models with Roman, and then a bit on our approach to open finance. And then we're, of course, would like to hear your questions and see if we have good answers for them. So not to hold anyone further up, I want to hand it over to you, Nico, with your ideas of open finance trends.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dominic. Right, so hopefully during the next 5 minutes, I'll give you a bit of an overview of where we are in the UK in terms of open finance, open banking. As you know, this was very much driven by the regulators here in the UK. Ever since really the financial crisis in 2008, they've been looking at ways in which they can promote competition in the financial market. And so they've put together a few initiatives that they put into the market. And so I will talk about a few of them just to give you a bit of context of where the market is today and how open banking plays with all this, right? So just to mention a few, So the 7-day account switching scheme, this is a scheme by which a customer can go to a new bank, right, and ask them to move their accounts from the previous bank. So if they, if they don't like it anymore, they just go to a new bank and they say, look, can you take over my account? And now this new bank will then take the account, move all the direct debits, all the standing orders, all the transactions, all over to the new one. And this is completely transparent for the customer himself, right? So, or herself. So essentially, that sort of gave customers a lot of flexibility as to which they want, who they want to bank with, right? And made it easier to switch banks. Faster payments is another one that is interesting because now all transfers and transactions can be done instantly. So that really changed also the way we bank here in the UK. So we don't have fees or charges on these transactions, and it's not in most of them, not in all of them. And so that also helped, having that digital experience of just sending money across very quickly. But in addition to this, the government has been putting a lot of emphasis on making the UK the best place for establishing a fintech. And also in line with that, they've been providing new banking licenses again, after decades of not doing this anymore. So this is kind of a context, right, in which sort of open banking was launched back in 2018, like Dominic was saying, on the back of PSD2, although they were running in parallel with different timeframes. But what open banking is a regulation by which originally the main 9 UK banks were instructed to open their platforms, so that third-party providers could access their accounts and then also their customers' accounts and also make transactions directly in them. So these exposures of the bank's infrastructure was meant to be done using the application programming interfaces, or most commonly known APIs. And obviously that requires customers to provide consent as to which providers are allowed to access their data and also transact with their data, right? And I think it's been the focus on sort of understanding and providing that sort of consent management function, as well as defining a standard for the API that has actually driven the efforts of the first 2 years of open banking. So although adoption has increased in 2019 in comparison to 2018, it hasn't been a revolution so far. So like people expected it to sort of explode. And I think we're seeing a bit of a slower impact. But you see some developments, so mainly adoption has increased in credit ratings checks that are done through open banking now, and other functions such as data aggregators, for example, or credit agency, of personal finance management solutions as well. They used to use another technology. Now they use open banking for increased security, right? But there are also some more innovative initiatives being done. One is called Open Banking for Good, where the UK's biggest building society, together with some partners and charities, are looking at ways in which open banking can help improve the situation of people living with financial difficulties. And in a sort of a similar line, there are also new fintechs looking into this. So there's one called Snoop that's actually using open banking with AI to look at the customer expenditures and then provide ways in which a customer, advice and ways in which a customer can save money and also better invest their money. But what you really see the change is with the new challenger banks. And Dominic, if you go to the next slide, you may have heard of some of them, even seen some of them. I mean, over the last few years, Monzo, Revolut, Starling, Tide, there are really many others have taken over a big portion of the market. If you walk through London, you see their ads everywhere, and their sort of the customer base have also increased substantially over the last couple of years. Now some of them are actually also moving across the Atlantic into the US. And another thing that happened is that you see more sort of niche fintechs also arising. So fintechs are looking at very specific parts of the market that may have not been well served by the bigger banks in the past. So, for example, one that is looking at lending exclusively for British farmers, for instance. There are others that are looking at only small businesses. So, for example, Tide is one of them. So, and then you see more and more of these coming up every every day, pretty much. So that's sort of the context, and that's open banking where we are. When people talk in the UK about open finance, this is sort of the next step to open banking. And actually they started looking at, okay, so how is this that so far has been all around current or checking accounts, and transactions, is going to now expand into sort of the insurance industry? How is it going to expand to other areas of banking, like lending, like wealth management, for example? And there's been now a workforce put in place by the UK government that is looking at open finance itself. And they're supposed to be looking at, okay, so how is, what sort of barriers this is going to encounter? How is this going to benefit the consumers going forwards? And so they started working, I think, at the end of last year. So we should be looking at outcome of this between now and June, let's say. So it'd be very interesting to see, how this open banking now expands into other areas, and that's why what is called open finance, at least here in the UK. So I hope I gave you a bit of an overview, and then I'll open for questions later on. And now over to you, Dominic. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Nico. I think that puts it into perspective. I think if we look at where Canada is right now, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, I think the UK showed over the last couple of years, what happens. And I think it's interesting to see that there's niche entrants and niche and challenger banks that really arise and force the competition. I had a dialogue about 2 weeks ago with a data governance company. And interesting wise, a lot of the discussion came around about data access management. How easy, how hard will it be? All the consent and exposing the data in a standardized API way. And so one of the sentences or quotes that comes to mind out of that discussion with them was, there's going to be way more data consumers going forward, people who want access to the data, than data providers. And I think the banks will be a data provider. And therefore, I think it's going to be an interesting lens if we now look a little bit over to data and what the impacts to data are. Okay. So Shirley.
Sure. Thanks, Dominic. I just wanted to start, I guess, with by talking about data in the context of an organization's data architecture, and go over some ways that open banking, open finance could impact. So when we look at this diagram here, this is a pretty standard view of data architecture. It consists of 5 different layers: the storage layer, the ingestion layer, the insight layer, the consumption layer, and the governance layer. So I want to go through them one by one and just speak really quickly on each one. So if we click, the storage layer is the epicenter of the data architecture. It's the centralized or distributed storage of raw or processed, granular, or aggregated, structured or unstructured data that's populated through the ingestion layer, and it provides context for both the insight and consumption layers. In the storage layer, you could have in-memory, relational, open source, massively parallel processing databases. If your company decides to use your storage layer as both the source and the target for open banking APIs, the platform's performance to deliver and receive data will be critical to your success and competitive advantage. If there's strong adoption in Canada, open banking may stretch the capabilities of your existing databases with potentially large and unpredictable influx of API-related data. And most significantly, this data will have varying degrees of quality. So you'll need to monitor it, you'll need to track it, even maybe quarantine it before you can blend it with other data and make it available for consumption. The next layer, the ingestion layer, is the gatekeeper to the storage layer. It is typically home to a number of data integration technologies, such as ETL, extract, transform, load, or ELT, extract, load, transform, to ingest raw data and prepare it for consumption. The ingestion layer may receive data in a number of different modes. You can stream it from the IoT or Internet of Things. It can come in by batch, real-time, or event-driven. The sources of data will include on-premise, cloud solutions, third-party data aggregators, and now it's going to include open banking APIs. So data received from APIs may stress ingestion systems, because this data in APIs are real-time. So you'll be dealing with more real-time data than you may normally have dealt with in the past. So you need to make sure that these processors will be robust, and especially in the air handling and dealing with data that does not meet corporate standards of quality and completeness. And of course, to ensure that it meets data quality standards, if you don't have data quality standards, you should have them and get them set up. The next layer, the insight layer, consists of technologies designed to drive insights through descriptive, prescriptive, and predictive analytics. Expect an increase in artificial intelligence, especially machine learning and deep learning, to deliver more personalized customer experience and develop innovative propositions. So you can also expect that there's going to be richer data through data sharing. You're going to have data sources that are coming in that will tell you more and more about the customer's behavior. Things like customer risk profile, markets not owned, and lost pipeline. You'll have more information to determine what's going on in your customer's financial life. So, but at the same time, if you already have existing models, you're going to have to reconsider how those models were built. And because they were built with different types of data sets that were derived from different sources. Now, moving on to the consumption layer, this layer is made up of applications that consume data from storage layer to customize customer experience, to support operational decision-making, to inform frontline staff or meet regulatory and compliance commitments. So these types of applications could include CRM, digital marketing, call center automation, chatbots, robotic process automation, just to name a few. With open banking, expect the increase of data-enabled applications, but success will be contingent on your organization's ability to ensure responsive access to trusted, and I underline that word trusted, high quality data. And that's a perfect segue to the governance layer. This layer establishes the rules of engagement for the management and access of data across roles, responsibilities, decisions, rights, policies, and standards. In a world with open banking, data quality, one of the key functions of data governance, should be first and foremost at the top of everyone's mind. Business and reputational risk will increase with open banking for two main reasons. Your own data and all of its qualities, good and bad, will be exposed to more external parties. And number two, other companies' data quality issues will become your data quality issues. It's the perfect medium to grow and culture data quality, quote unquote, diseases. The following data governance activities will become mission critical to the survival of an organization in participating in open banking. Establish data quality standards if you don't already have them. Inventory open banking data providers and rank them on data quality and completeness, as well as reliability and timeliness. Track the lineage of data back to the API and provider. Collect and maintain an inventory of data sharing agreements that you have set up with other open banking participants. Establish a data access rights management, which is something that Dominic has already mentioned. It's important that now you have a way of managing who gets data when, and it needs to be something that is seamless and transparent and will be nimble to react to changes in open banking. You're going to need to establish help desk functions to report, triage, and correct data quality issues. You're going to need to establish policies, roles, and responsibilities and workflows for data retention, disposal, and decommissioning. Next slide, Dominic. So I don't think in Canada we will fully know the impact of open banking or open finance until the scope of data has been defined and Canada decides to move forward. When open banking was implemented in Australia, the Farrell report talked about 4 different classifications of data that could be included when, which you can see described here in this slide. There's the customer provided data, which excludes identity verification. There's transaction data. There's value added customer data and aggregated data sets. The Department of Finance Canada started the conversation in September 2018 with a qualitative research project, which surfaced that the younger generation of consumers were more likely to use open banking and recognize its benefits. There was an advisory committee set up on open banking, also in 2018 in Canada. And in 2019, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada published Canada's Digital Charter and how the government of Canada plans to build a foundation of trust. As of yet, we don't know when Canada is moving forward, but we need to be ready. And so when the decision is finally made to move forward, the full impact of your data ecosystem will need to be addressed. So I'm just going to go through. I have a couple more slides. I'll go through them really quickly. Next slide, Dominic. So 4 impacts, breaking down the geographic barriers between Canada and the rest of the world. And the 1 and 2 are kind of related. When we break down those barriers, then anybody wanting to do business in Europe from Canada is going to need to consider how Europe's GDPR is going to affect them. And Canada as a whole may want to decide if they're going to set up a similar regulation around data privacy and data portability. Open banking will introduce competition with new entrants who will have the coolest, most current technologies and no legacy systems to hold them back. So existing FIs will need to fully harness data in order to earn customer loyalty and engagement and provide competitive products and services as well as superior customer experience. And finally, and probably most importantly, data governance programs. It's important to make sure that you have those in place. So let's move on to the last slide. So finally, I just want to leave you with these 3 thoughts. Transforming open banking from idea to pertinent data practices requires looking beyond APIs, and data will never be worth more than consumers' confidence in the data practices. And data value isn't an attribute of how much data you hold, but it's the result of consumer perceptions. And on to you again, Dominic.
Well, thank you, Shirley, so much for a bit of a look into the data space. To me, I liked when you said, it's the perfect climate for I want to call it a data disease where poor quality data spreads, and where the sharing of data is very where the data quality may overall suffer on this. But I look at from a consumer point of view, I think there's also positive impacts, and I also do believe there is actually a chance hidden in open banking. So despite looking at the data quality but I think the data offers the ability to go into new business models. It allows you to expand your knowledge about a customer, which then drives I want to say, completely different business models to revenue models that you can build, not just on gut feelings anymore, but on data that you actually have available. So that being said, I want to hand it over to Roman in terms of, what do we see in terms of business models? What is the impact? Is there a longer term impact also to what you call the incumbents?
Thanks, Dominic. Well, I will cover a more strategic view on the topic of open finance. The financial services industry is right now changing rapidly, and banks need to prepare for that shift that is happening right now, and also obviously adopt their business models accordingly. Platforms are definitely the key to success, and there are famous examples proving that point. Just think of Uber, the world's largest transportation platform that does not own a single car, or Booking.com, the famous booking platform, not owning a single hotel. And there are plenty of other examples. Customers love those solutions as they are convenient and easy to handle. And they actually expect exactly the same capabilities from their financial institutions. Especially the younger generation, they don't like to visit a bank, for example, to open an account. They expect such processes to be convenient and that they can be done from home in best case. Some of them, by the way, might have never been in a branch their whole lifetime. So that's also a different point of view. So many fintechs have discovered this gap in expectations. They are building customer-centric solutions to benefit from it, obviously. They have a digital mindset and know that open APIs can be used to integrate with partners as well as with competitors. Therefore, transferring data and switching of account from traditional banks is more or less a breeze for them. Those fintechs don't have the intention to offer, the whole complex portfolio of a bank. They like simplicity and actually focus on sweet spots where they can earn some money. And they expand their partner ecosystem to enhance and improve their services over time. On top, there are evolving technologies like cloud computing, software as a service, modern software development frameworks that allow them to have great time to market and also minimize the invests and risks on their side. So they kind of scale and pay as they grow. Slowly, banks are also starting to jump on the train. Some because of regulations that they're forcing them, others because they recognize the competitive advantage and opportunities they can gain out of it. But many traditional institutions struggling with this undertaking, their internal legacy IT, their organizational silos they have built over years, and also their usually very complex product portfolio often leads to failed transformation programs and obviously also stranded cost in this area. So the question is how much time is left for established financial institutions to take those hurdles. The credit card business was always in the hands of a few big players, and solutions like PayPal and Stripe are more and more overtaking traditional payment solutions, especially when it comes to the area of mobile e-commerce. Crowdfunding and also microcredit platforms are increasingly gaining popularity. And the biggest challenge, large established platform players like Amazon, Google, and Apple also start to offer financial services, and for sure will broaden their financial portfolio over time. So let me just quote Frank Schwabe from the Think Tank Forum to answer the question. As a result, it is very likely that by 2035, traditional banks and saving banks will largely retire because they have lost the client interface to major online, retail, big technology, and social media brands. Well, at least something to think about. Dominic, next slide. Thank you. I really love this German fintech overview. It actually perfectly shows the rapidly growing platform ecosystem. There are solutions for savings, credits, payments, e-commerce, accounting, and many more. for consumers as well as for small to medium enterprises. Many of them very well designed and usually offered on a low monthly subscription basis. So those platform businesses are aware that they are competing. Nevertheless, their strategy is to partner and integrate with each other in order to offer more comprehensive end-to-end solutions for their clients. By the way, that's just Germany. So I would be really curious how a visual illustration of the worldwide fintechs would look like. What do you think? Will those fintechs survive? Well, I doubt it. At some point, the usual consolidation dynamics, including mergers, acquisitions, will set in. Nevertheless, those fintechs are here right now, and they are ready to take their share of the revenue from traditional financial institutions. Next slide, Dominic, please. Thank you. So, what strategic choices do financial businesses have to survive in the new area of finance? For sure, banks can no longer rely on closed shop offerings. They need to open up to benefit from open finance opportunities on the one hand, but also to make up for the areas where open finance will lead to squeezed margins on the other hand. They can obviously go for the defense strategies that you can see on the left to maintain the status quo, and defend their current business model, for example, by increasing digitalization and automation of core processes, or launching direct and online sales channels for their current products, or maybe even start collaboration with fintechs, at least as a first step. However, those defense strategies are mainly cost takeout plays, and on their own will not be enough to be successful in the future. So banks really need to rethink their product and service portfolio, and in general, the way they are doing their business. They need to transition from the left, from the defense area, to the right, to the offense area. And they need to break down internal silos and establish a new digital mindset, which has a customer centricity also on its core. Some banks choose the road of creating new digital greenfield entities to get there. Others prefer to run internal transformation programs to tackle shortcomings of their traditional structures and mindsets. Either way, moving towards platform business models will be the key for future success. Financial services businesses of the future understand and utilize positive networking effects of platforms. And they build a strategic partner ecosystem around them to enable the innovation. They're also capable to understand their customers' pain points and needs. And they offer comprehensive services which ease the life of their clients actually. Some services there might be delivered by the bank itself. Some services might be provided by strategic partners. And by the way, some of those products even might not have a direct financial context at all. It's all about understanding the customer's journeys and increasing customer convenience. So, well, a lot of challenges ahead. Maybe let me give you a final thought. Established businesses have a strategic advantage that are, in my opinion, highly underestimated. First, regulations act as a shield. Yeah, I know it's sometimes a worrisome thing for banks to adhere to those regulations. On the other hand, those regulations make the life of new market entrants cumbersome. Second, established relationships with local businesses can be used to offer actually tailored local services. This could be a huge advantage for traditional banks. And third, also not to be underestimated, traditional banks have a huge amount of data and insights about their customers. So I'm sure the companies who understand to play those advantages well, those will be the ones which will be also successful in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Roman. Yeah, I think playing off that platform business, but when I look at the last slide, we're talking about networking effects. I think a big portion of what open banking does is standardized, but at the same time, I do believe the flexibility because there will be, I want to say, disruption from many different angles, and there will be niche providers in many different ways. There needs to be a way to I want to say, create that flexibility so that a bank can react and can be open to, play offense and is able to expand their own business models out of this. So that being said, Nico, as a product manager in Axxiome, what are we doing from your point of view to facilitate this?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dominic. Yeah, so I mean, I think that when you think about open finance, there is a technology piece, and there's also a cultural piece that is also as important, I would think, right? When you look at traditional banks, they need to embrace open finance. I think there needs to be a decision right at the top, but also the whole organization needs to buy into this idea. And I think then we can talk about the technology. And so in terms of the technology, I believe for open finance, you need to look at it holistically. Moreover, and really focusing on traditional banks, they will have a complex legacy architecture that was put in place, a few years ago, if not several years ago, in a different context and at a different time, right, with different needs. And I think now, we need to look at that architecture and think, okay, so I'm not saying we need to, completely remove it or anything like that, but, we need to look at that and say, okay, how is each of the pieces that compose it going to help me with open finance? And like it was mentioned a few times, I think that there are a few things here that are very important. One is to eliminate the silo channels, right? You need to be able to provide that omni-channel experience to your customers. So this going to a branch, if anyone is ever going to go to a branch, they're not expecting to restart the whole process again, and they're expecting the processes to flow from one channel to the other, because at the end it's their interaction with your bank, right? And for that you also need that to generate an open API architecture that is centrally managed and that will manage your channels, but also will manage your ecosystem. So in open finance, banks will start to generate an ecosystem of business partners, right? And that is key that we manage that centrally so that we can manage all those processes and then start selling, our products and services through all the channels, not only ours, but also that of the ecosystem and the partners. So of course, as it was mentioned before as well, enabling proper data governance is key, and security as well. Data ownership, data privacy is going to be key in this environment, and then really putting focus on the flexibility and the agility of the architecture, right? On the integration mainly, so that you can benefit not only from well, actually, you can comply to regulation, but on top of that, you can also benefit from generating these new business processes, this line of businesses with the ecosystem. So, Dominic, if you go to the next slide, please. So at Axxiome, obviously, we provide advice, services, and also we have a set of products that we have designed to serve this purpose. So we look at a flexible architecture that can serve in different needs and different situations, right? So going from legacy architecture that is very complex and helping in that environment to actually be quick and accelerate the digital transformation and therefore the integration into open finance. So they're modular and they can serve different needs. And from a sort of a traditional bank to a greenfield bank that needs a platform to run on. So we also we can provide that as well. So we really believe there is power and there's a lot of opportunities in open finance. So yes, very exciting times for the industry.
Thanks, Nico.
Yep.
Now, I think we went and we're kind of coming up at the time where we transition over to ATB, and we still will be here to answer some questions. But I think we've heard now from the UK and how this took off there and how it started over what we should look at data point of view. and the business models. At the same time, I think it's really important now to look at it from a local perspective. As such, I would like to hand this now over to Nav from ATB. He will be speaking about the local impacts, I think, of open finance, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you, Nav.
Great, thanks, Dominic. Hopefully everyone can hear me fine here. I'll actually turn my camera on, so in case you need to see me, you can do that as well. So we at ATB recognize that the Canadian economy does not operate in a vacuum, but rather in this fast evolving digital and data-driven economy. Daily we see examples of the transformational effect of digital innovation is having on both the financial sector and the global financial markets. And Canada has thus far played the laggard in the open banking evolution. The introduction of open banking has caused Canadian banks trepidation, but at ATB, we see the advantages to an open banking system can afford participants through the aggregation of customers' data and expansion of products. We really foresee that the future of banking lies in a digital and data-driven economy, an economy that recognizes and accepts that data is owned by the customer, and with ownership comes the right to use and share that data as deemed fit. So I'm encouraged by Canada's digital charter. Principle 4 in particular of the charter states the core idea behind open banking, that consumers have rights to their data and can share it or transfer it. We'd love to see these principles brought to life in Canada. The overall benefit of open banking to Canadians and Albertans in particular will be to promote competition through intuitive customer-centric products and services and to stimulate investment and innovation. And that's important to all of us. In Canada, progress has been slow, primarily because regulations and standards have not been formally set yet. Not to mention banks often fear that open banking takes aim at their bread and butter, holding money and moving money and lending money. We anticipate that federal regulations are coming to Canada soon, and we want to help shape the new era of financial services while building in as many data safety and privacy safeguards as possible. There are currently over 50 fintechs in Alberta, and we want to make Alberta the best place in Canada for fintechs to set up shop. And as Shirley mentioned earlier, when open banking does come to Canada, bringing shared information, cross-institutional communication, and open access, the true potential of artificial intelligence will really begin to shine. At ATB, we're already building out data processes and infrastructure in ways that can be accessed safely by fintechs and third parties. If and when we get the green light, right now our teams are already exploring and testing our own capabilities and potential offerings using APIs and setting up structures to test out and validate with customers. Preparing for open banking means we're asking a lot of questions and experimenting in a number of areas. And as I said earlier, we want to shape the future of open banking in Canada. That's why we're super excited about hosting the first ever Open Finance Hackathon in Alberta. The hackathon is an opportunity for developers across all sectors, not just fintechs, to work in ATB's open banking sandbox to explore the art of the possible. For the hackathon, we are opening up our own internal sandbox environment that we created for our own experimenting. All participants will have access to our sandbox, which contains over 200 plus open banking APIs, following the PSD2 standard and open API specs. In addition, our sandbox will be available in 2 instances, one that contains synthetic data and one that contains no data at all, allowing you to explore with a blank sheet. And just to clarify, there is no real customer data. The data is entirely synthesized. At ATB, we believe banks could be among the biggest winners of open banking if we truly listen and are thoughtful about opportunities for customers. We're listening and really looking forward to what we can build together. Lastly, I'd like to thank Axiom for being a great partner and supporting our hackathon. Thanks, Dominic.
Well, thank you, Nav. I think so. There were a couple of questions, and I will scroll through them. But before I get there, I mean, now from you, I heard really much a big yes. You believe open banking will have a positive impact. Nico, can I put you on the spot? If you would say overall in the UK, across, I don't know, customers, legislators, and the banks themselves, what's the feeling? Is open banking a success?
Well, I mean, I think it is. I think you see the change, and I think the sort of consumer perception and what consumers think about banking is changing, and then the sort of the demand is changing in line with open banking. So I think is pretty much inevitable, and you see, like I was saying earlier, you see that the regulators took a very front-facing step into all this. But you can see now banks embracing this as well. They see the opportunity. I mean, there is a threat. There are new fintechs and new challenger banks coming in as well, so they have to react. And yes, they are, some of them, struggling to actually compete in this environment. But I think it's, I don't know, I kind of think it's inevitable, and they're realizing of that. So they are doing things. I had one of the bigger banks applications here, the mobile banking app, and they put up a separate app for sort of a PFM, so personal finance management, and so they launched this. They used it, or was available for like 2-3 months, and then they sort of removed it. And now they sort of incorporating this into the main app. So there is a lot of things going on, mainly in the background sometimes. And I think, like I said, so far it's been sort of okay, getting the consent management right, getting the the APIs sort of right, so the standard for the APIs right, and so on. And so from now on, I'm expecting to see a lot more adoption, a lot more solutions that people will start demanding really from the market, and the market will be providing as well. Yeah.
Right. Then there is a question here from the audience, and it says, what are Canadian banks doing to defend against open banking? And then I actually think a second question, why defend, why not use properly? Nav, I want to play this over to you, because I think the Canadian regulation isn't there quite yet, and maybe you have a view on this.
Yeah, certainly, Dominic. The Canadian regulations aren't there yet in terms of open banking. That doesn't mean that we can't start moving forward. And as I mentioned earlier, ATB has started working on experimenting and understanding what we can offer and what we can do broadly. But I think that what you're going to find is that certainly, as I mentioned, there's some trepidation from banks in that it's certainly touching upon their moneymaker, and they're concerned about that. But I do believe that we're going to start to see that banks are going to be more open to sharing of data and information. It may be in baby steps, but we certainly will see banks start to play nicely rather than fighting it. There has been a bit of fighting off the competition, but I certainly think that that the tide is going to swing the other way, and we're going to see a lot more collaboration start to occur.
Okay. Then this is a very ATB specific question. ATB helped with their MasterCard. Is ATB open to helping other fintech companies? I think that goes to where ATB already has a partnership with some fintechs. Is ATB open to work with other fintechs?
Absolutely, we are. So if anyone is interested in exploring and working with us in trying to build solutions, we're absolutely open to that. You can reach out directly to myself or Claire, who's provided her contact information on this webinar. And so certainly reach out to us, and we can do some exploration in terms of what you're looking to build and see if we can help you.
All right, perfect. And I'm going to go over, this is an interesting question, one that touches me, that I find really interesting, that goes, a lot of benefits and current examples of open banking appear to be focused on retail clients. What is the advantage for commercial clients in open banking? I'm not sure, Roman, do you have a view on this, Nico?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if I jump in. So I mean, some of the examples I mentioned here in the UK actually are focusing on small businesses, so maybe not big corporates yet, but small business for sure. There's also been an initiative from the government to increase competition in this area, in particular, obviously in the UK. But we've seen sort of fintechs popping up in this respect, and also big banks taking their sort of share of the market here as well. That's sort of just being launched now, like beginning of 2020, when things are going to start to happen. So banks were busy building all these solutions last year, but there is that tendency to go into sort of business side, corporate, and I guess corporate may follow later on. But from a business perspective, sort of, yeah, it's not only retail. We're starting to see movement there as well.
Roman, did you want to add something? I was thinking of your slide in that regard when we talked about the different areas where fintechs are popping up and you know where they just go into a piece of the pie. I want to call it like this. You talked a bit about what you call it, micro lending. Do you see something in the commercial space as well?
I mean, as Nico mentioned, it's starting in the SMB sector, so small medium enterprises. There are some countries and regions that are really pushing on those solutions, especially when it comes also to, for example, CRM solutions integrated with banking, or accounting solutions, payroll solutions that are fully integrated, and project management solutions, including the whole life cycle that SMEs need to cover when running those kind of solutions. Then also fully integrated with micro lending, if they need something for a certain project where they already have the contract available, and so on. So especially in Australia and New Zealand, you can see a lot of solutions that are evolving there. I'm not very much into the UK there and Canada, but I assume that there will be similar solutions as well. So I think banks really need to carefully think on how they can expand their portfolio by partnering with those kind of solutions. Banks will not be able to do all of them on their own. This will be not possible and would be too expensive.
Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking about an example of my own that we were working with a very, very, very large heavy equipment manufacturer, and they have, I want to say, a dealer network, and part of what they offer is also financing for final customer, or also a wholesale financing. Right now, for them, it's a pretty high hurdle to go to different banks to, I would say, connect and understand what the cost of financing would be. So it's easy for them to work directly with their OEM, despite them having other options. I do see that these type of relationships may, in a way, change through open banking as well. Where now, if you have a standard where you, for example, can get your loan quotes and anything via APIs in a much easier way, that these type of businesses that are in themselves multi-billion-dollar businesses are actually able to change the way on how they look on financing their own or satisfying their own financing needs and those of what they can actually then offer to their retail customers. I think in that space, I would assume that open banking will play a role for particularly these type of players. All right, then question directly to ATB, very technical. Can we have access to this ATB Sandbox before the hackathon? Naf, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I will. Good question. I do believe we're going to give people access to the Sandbox prior to the hackathon. To be frank with you, I'm not sure, just from a logistical perspective, of when that would get rolled out. If it'll be a week before, a few days before. A lot of it has to just do with the messaging and communications and making sure that that it's stood up and ready to handle the bombardment of developers on there. So I'd have to get back to you on that, but I can assure you that you will get access to it prior to the hackathon.
All right, thank you. Then there's a question that's semi-technical. I think, and this one is a little different, I think, in open banking PSD2. I don't know what the Canadian legislation will be, but how does consent in open banking work? For example, in the UK, when or where does a consumer consent to an FI sharing the information to a fintech? Nico, do you want to take this one? Do you have those insights?
Yeah, well, so essentially this is part of, so from a sort of a user perspective as a customer, right? You will be doing this through your mobile banking app, essentially, right? So, or your online banking. You will say, yes, I want this, this and that vendor to actually have access to my account. Technically, you manage this at probably the API management layer, where you have a consent management tool, right? And this will actually be looking at, okay, what sort of what vendors have access and can use the APIs to access the certain customer's account, for example, right, or make transactions through that account. So it is at that level that consent is managed, right? Yeah, so I mean, some banks will have a sort of an ecosystem of partners that you can choose from on their website, for example, or on their online banking, or others may make that look differently. But at the end of the day, customers have the ability to say, okay, they can, this certain vendor can do this, and that, on my accounts, and then obviously they would have the ability to then say, okay, that this sort of, I don't know, this permission is now finished, and so on and so forth, right? And you kind of manage that and at that sort of API management layer.
And it's very interesting to actually see how some banks utilize this kind of functionality. So they are creating some kind of umbrella apps, I would call them, where they actually, by having the consent of the customer, obviously, integrate with other banks so that the customer can actually manage all the accounts that this customer has from various banks using one single mobile app. Yeah, so of course, obviously, it's very easy then to switch those customers to the actual bank. Yeah, so if you are under the umbrella at some point, it will be very difficult for banks to make business and retain their customers.
All right. Thank you, Roman. So I think I tried to capture all the questions and the answers coming from you guys. Maybe just trying to summarize that. I think in Canada, legislation is around the corner. I think ATB is really presenting an open environment for fintechs and wants to actively encourage the collaboration and to really get into this networking space. I think there's these three aspects I think that we try to highlight from what can we learn from what's happening and how far is the standardization and the API exposure and this approach coming from the UK and Australia, who are ahead in the game in terms of how far the legislation there has gone. I don't think it can be stopped. I think this is a train moving forward, and it's a positive impact for consumers. It opens chances, but you have to have a very, very good visibility on how much data you will acquire, how you verify the data, how you quantify the data, how you score your data, and how you are able to actually have a positive impact out of the potential data that you're available to. And the third part is really it takes a bit of thinking around the business models. And to me, this is the main thing, because I do believe open banking will enable really a community-driven approach where bilateral relationships with customers, where maybe a bank becomes a sales channel for a customer becomes a sales channel for a bank. Banks with fintechs are symbiotic, and sometimes in the other way, less symbiotic. To me, open banking, I think, gives all those possibilities. It's neither good nor bad, but I think it will put a lot of ability and control into the consumer's hand, and ultimately it will challenge the banks in a good way. That'd be how I would wrap it up. But I'm welcome for any other feedback. All right. If not, Claire, I want to give it back to you. There was a question if slides will be available after the webinar. Maybe you can speak to this. If not, thank you all very much for the participation.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the slides, we will actually be sharing a recorded version of this webinar with everyone, so you can access the slides and everything through there. So thank you.